morning, everyone from the US, and good evening in the UK. My name is Dr. Ronald E. Hall. Currently, I'm a professor in the School of Social Work here at Michigan State University. My area of expertise happens to be the global emergence of colorism, which I think in the UK you refer to as shadeism. My next book on the topic will be out shortly, Springer Press, called The Globalization of Colorism. Before we begin our panel, we're going to be addressing an issue that has been of great challenge to men of and boys of African descent. And this conference is put together in honor of two luminaries in the field of Black psychology, Professor White and Professor Jones. We're about to begin the speaking of by the panelists. And we are going to begin with Dr. Majors. I want to say a little bit about his background. And I should say beforehand, for those who follow Dr. Majors, if I mispronounce your surname, do not hesitate to correct me. Some of them are going to be a bit challenging. I think Dr. Majors, I can handle that, but some of the others, I'm going to need some help. Dr. Majors and I go back, I don't want to say how many years, but we go back a few years when we were both professors at the University of Wisconsin here in the U.S. He was employed in the School of Psychology, and I was employed in the School of Social Work. He is currently a counseling psychologist. He's an honorary professor at the University of Colorado here in the U.S., and he's also a distinguished fellow and director of the Applied Center for Emotional Literacy. And he's been doing that work for a couple of decades, actually, in the UK. He's the founder and former deputy editor of the Journal of African American Studies, which was formerly the Journal of African American Men, which was the first journal founded in the US dedicated specifically for African American men. He's also a former clinical fellow of psychiatry at Harvard School of Medicine. And while at Harvard, he also co-founded a national organization, which I work with, called the National Council on African American Men, which was serving as a kind of an umbrella organization that served specifically for the challenges met by African Americans. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Richard Meyers, and would you please turn on your audio and your video?
Thank you. Dr. Hall, thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate that. Today, I wanted to talk about emotional literacy, emotional technologies, and choosing emotions. Yes, choosing emotions. We now have the technology that we actually have the ability to help individuals choose their emotions, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. One of the things that has been very important is trying to find a way to deal with issues with regard to our precious Black boys, and trying to help precious Black boys be able to be in a situation where they can have better choices, better life opportunities. Because oftentimes many of their problems and their issues have oftentimes been in the context of schooling. So one of the things I want to do today is talk about emotional literacy as it relates both to Black boys, but also to teachers. First of all, emotional literacy is concerned with how we understand, recognize, manage, process, and regulate our emotions. For many of you who are aware of my work on the cool pose and gender, my cool pose kind of sets out many of the issues, sets out many of the problems around masculine identity and how ultimately Black boys have learned to cope with hardship. Um, while the cool pose has been adaptive coping mechanism in many ways, often as much as it's an adaptive coping mechanism, a cool pose can be maladaptive in many ways. There's a term I use in literature called the problem of selective indiscrimination. That is the problem of selective indiscrimination, which means is that the cool pose as a coping mechanism works so well, it then becomes so difficult for the young Black boy to switch off the cool pose, which then contributes to many of the kinds of problems around Black on Black crime, many of the other kinds of issues that oftentimes Black boys may have, Black men or Black boys may have challenges around, whether it's, issues or challenges in school, maybe gang behavior. Like I said, the coup pose as adaptive coping mechanism um, has been a major coping mechanism that, like in many situations, will work very, very well. But then when they want, but it becomes very difficult for them to negotiate when the appropriate times is to be able to switch the coping mechanism off. So and so over the last, that book was written probably about 30 years ago. And I've struggled for a good portion of that 30 years on trying to look at what might be the problem. I mean, what might be the solution to helping them to develop a more appropriate coping response to navigating racism day to day and some of the other kinds of hardships. And one of the in my research, one of the which I feel is one of the answer, or one of the areas that I think can make a major difference in terms of helping Black boys to be able to create a more adaptive coping mechanism, but also develop the appropriate kinds of skills and strategies to help them to be able to, to be able to negotiate society and people around them to have a lot more success. And so my colleagues, Dr. Lew Simmons, who is speaking next, and my colleague Janet Gray, who not only are my colleagues, have been working with me and researching in this area for a number of years. They also are the co-authors for a new book that we're working on around emotional literacy emotional literacy and looking at how viable it is with regard to helping not only Black boys but teachers how to choose emotions, and we're using emotional literacy not only to help Black boys but also teachers how to choose emotion. And if you think about that potential kind of technology, that's I think that this is the technology with regard to many of the challenges Black boys. I think this is potentially some of the most promising technology, because if you're able to choose your emotion, whatever situation that you may be in, whether it's peer pressure in a gang, whether you're in a situation that in school where somebody's trying to influence you to do something, or you're in a difficult situation, or you're angry or you're upset, and that you've got a tool like you have a tool that allows you to be able to understand, recognize, manage, process, and regulate your emotion, and hence choose your emotion. That to me is very promising and very powerful research. And this is something Dr. Simmons and Dr. Gray and I have been working on for a number of years. Um, and the research on emotional literacy, both with teachers and I would say young Black boys, have graduated to not only looking at emotional literacy as a construct, but also looking at how we can advance it to technology. So in the chapter that I'm going to be talking about today on emotional literacy, which, by the way, is in a chapter in our new book that just came out with Emerald on emotional literacy, is the very is the first chapter ever written on emotional literacy, emotional development on and Black boys. While emotional intelligence slash emotional literacy has been around for the past 20 years, if you will, it's not something that really has been introduced into the Black community. Hence, Dr. Gray and Dr. Simmons and I are very excited and very proud that we have taken this technology and not only introduced it to the Black community, but it's expanded it from the construct of emotional literacy in terms of how viable it is in terms of working with Black boys, but also looking at technologies, what we call new emotional technologies. And in that chapter, which is free for a short period of time, which is on our website, that particular chapter will have a copy of this new technology, of some of the new technologies and tools that we use, that we train teachers to work with our precious Black boys. And one of the tools is called the Emotional Literacy Reflective Interactive Tool. And again, that will be free. We're currently working on an app that will be once. So that will be available as well to schools, and to agencies and organizations which want to take part and apply some of this technology in their institutions. And again, we're very excited about the possibilities of what this technology can do in a variety of different fields in terms of helping Black boys to be able to have much more satisfying lives. One of the things I should say, so the rest of my my presentation today, while we have developed technology for both Black boys, we also very proud that we've also developed emotional literacy strategies, techniques, tools, and technology around teachers, because we are putting Black boys into the classroom that were in fact becoming much more emotional literate in terms of managing, navigating, processing, regulating, and managing their emotions. And we were proud to say that our work had helped them change. However, we were putting them back in the classrooms where teachers had not changed. They were still yelling, talking down to black children, disrespecting them, and oftentimes, you know, like I said, yelling, and not being able to engage or have the different gears. It was, shut up, be quiet, get out. What we found out is that many of the behaviors that teachers, with regard to emotional literacy, that we found from our research, that many teachers have low emotional literacy, low levels of emotional literacy, which means is that they oftentimes do not understand how to develop relationships with young Black boys, how to talk to them, how to communicate to them, do not have any cultural understanding in terms of their belief system, their customs, their values. For example, understanding the importance of respect in Black culture, understanding how saving face and honor. So the idea is not only to have emotional literacy, but also to be able to have a wrapper around, a cultural competent wrapper around emotional literacy. Otherwise, you have emotional literacy in a vacuum. And this has been the problem for the past 20 and 30 years before my colleagues Gray and Simmons, before we began to saying, wait a minute, this is some promising, research. However, what's missing from it is the wrap around cultural competence, and also not only cultural competence, but a gender-specific analysis to be able to expand this kind of work. And we wanted also to move the pendulum and have a paradigm shift from just talking about research in a vacuum, like oftentimes academics do, but we wanted this research to dance. We wanted it to move. We wanted to be able to make, we wanted to be able to make a difference in people's lives. So we said to ourselves is that what is it that the Black community needs? What is it that what tools do the young Black boys need? What information, what knowledge do the teachers need? So this is when we went out and started looking at not only tools but technologies, because oftentimes academics, get a lot of, are hit oftentimes and ridiculed for doing research, and oftentimes no one reads or stays in the library. And I think people who make that complaint oftentimes to about academics are absolutely correct. So we're very proud that we have expanded the academic work, and that we have been some of the first people in the country to not only introduce it into the country, into our thinking, but also to expand some of these tools. So let me talk about the time I have left. Dr. Hall, how much time do I have? Can you put your hand up? That'd be helpful. How much minutes do I have? 5? 10. I have 10 left. 2 5s, 10. Okay. All right. So anyway, so research shows that teachers are the number one. Teachers are the number one determinant or factor in terms of how of the potential outcomes of a Black child's life. So in other words, is that the relationship and the engagement that teachers or a particular teacher has with a child oftentimes will determine how successful or not a Black child is. And what do I mean by that? Is that one of the things I've dedicated my life to, I've been obsessed with reducing the numbers of exclusions by Black boys. And one of the reason why we have such high levels of exclusions in many of our school districts all over the world is because is that teachers oftentimes make decisions spontaneously. And they oftentimes would be knee-jerk, unthought, where they oftentimes will personalize. One of the things that I have tried to do with regard to emotional literacy, not only help teachers develop better relationships with young Black boys, but also how to engage them, but also how to forgive and forget. I was one of the first people to take forgiveness as a construct from religion and brought that to education. I have 12 competencies that in my tools, in my technologies that I have. The emotional literacy reflective tool is the tool that we use to help teachers to develop the kind of patients, also to help them to manage and regulate by a number of series of questions that help them to pause and to be able to make the right kinds of decisions, which Dr. Simmons will be talking about in a very few minutes. But we also have, I have 12 competencies. And these 12 competencies are with regard to teachers becoming emotional literate. Over 25 years, I've come up with 10 competencies that I feel that if these teachers can develop if these teachers can focus on these 12 competencies, these 10 competencies, they can be emotional literate. And one of the competencies, which because I only have time to speak about, is the competency of forgiveness. Again, I took the forgiveness construct from religion and brought it over to education, because one of the issues as a psychologist and interviewing teachers, one of the reasons why we had such high levels of exclusions is that teachers could not depersonalize. That if there was issues or there was an event that came up in the classroom that basically is they felt they could not depersonalize. They would personalize the issue almost as if that what the child was doing had everything to do with themselves. The more we found out that we were able to depersonalize, help teachers depersonalize, was we were able to decrease substantially exclusions by helping to get teachers to depersonalize and to forgive and to forgive. This was one of the most important things because oftentimes teachers will hold grudges. Now let's be honest. Let's be honest that people don't want to talk about it, but that is a major issue in the context of education. So these 10 competencies which I developed then are competencies that they can use in our chapter to help teachers become emotional literate with the understanding that they will develop better relationships, engage them more, and will have less exclusions in school. And the other thing that I should say is that not only that our education today focuses more on cognitive aspects of learning, but the issue is that what Simmons and Gray and I have found is that non-cognitive aspects of learning are just as important or more important than cognitive aspects of learning. Until the education system gets this, we're not going to have the substantial changes that we want. And what do I mean by non-cognitive aspects of learning? That if a child comes to school, he's sitting in the seat, and if that child is anxious, is scared, afraid, upset, confused, is that is not a state, what I call an emotional state for learning. A child cannot learn. He cannot motivate himself if the child is in a state of where he's panicking, he's anxious, scared, or afraid. So the issue is that you can have the best curriculum in the world, the best cognitive curriculum in the world, but unless that cognitive curriculum matches the non-cognitive curriculum, there's not going to, the education will not be optimized. So our work has been, I got 2 minutes. So our work will not be optimized. So one of the things that our team has done then, that we have again integrated in the work that we do with teachers for them to be able to understand the importance of this non-cognitive aspects of learning. So one of the things that and kind of close down here with the last few minutes that I have is that that if we can help teachers understand their personal triggers, if we can help them depersonalize, if we can help teachers reflect and unpack their behaviors, if we can help them to pause and slow down any action that they take to a child and be more thoughtful and less spontaneous, is that we believe, and this is what our app will do, because the teachers they'll pull themselves, rather than making a split quick decision about a child. The app that we're working on the emotional reflective tool, they can pull themselves aside, take some time aside, go to the teacher's lounge, and go through a series of questions. Did I have a particular bad night last night? Am I going to be a little bit more short because I didn't get as much sleep? Am I in a bad mood coming to school today because my uncle has cancer? So there's a series of questions that this app will go through based around emotional literacy to help teachers understand their emotional literacy state prior to coming into the classroom. And then also Dr. Simmons is going to talk about a mood meter, and this mood meter teachers can check in like the young black boys can every 2 or 3 hours in the classroom to check out what their state is. It's important for them to continuously to monitor their emotional state so that they know that how vulnerable they may be at any given time to making certain kinds of decisions. So this is the kind of technology. So we really have moved the debate on in terms of microscopically breaking down this kind of technology The last tool I want to mention that's also in this free chapter that we're giving away is on what we call non-crisis investment or banking time. Non-crisis or banking time, because one of the issues is that to be emotional literate, teachers have to be able to develop relationships. Surprising enough, most of them that we have met have not been able to develop those kinds of relationships. The non-crisis intervention tool will give examples of what kind of relationship you can develop in 25 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, for a minute. And there's many different examples that we give that where teachers said we don't have the time, then we always say, well, you have 30 seconds, you have 45 seconds. And we give all kinds of examples and things that teachers can say, things that they can do that would make a difference in terms of a young person's life, which we call teaching moments or Kodak moments. And we teach this around on our crisis investment tool. So all these things then collectively, including the things that my colleague Dr. Simmons will talk about, the reflective tool. He'll be more descriptive about what the tool is. He also will talk about the heart monitor, which is oftentimes that's been a major difference in terms of understanding young Black boys' moods in the classroom if they have a higher heart rate, and what that means versus a lower heart rate. And also he'll talk about the mood meter. So again, so in conclusion, then we're very fortunate not only to be involved in developing some of this new technology and tools that can help both teachers and young Black boys become emotional literate. We believe the more literate both the teacher and the Black child is in terms of emotional literate will help the child be able to have a much more positive life, and also make the teacher's life more satisfying in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Majors, for that insightful commentary. Our next speaker, I'd like to advise you to use the chat function if you have questions or comments that will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next speaker, Dr. Lou Simmons. He's a director of academics at the Ministry of Education and a senior fellow of the Applied Center for Emotional Literacy, Leadership, and Research. He's also a former assistant professor of the University of Dayton, and he has a long range of community activism, both nationally and internationally. Most notably, a national activism in Bermuda that has inspired an international brotherhood in the United States of America. And from that will spark the establishment of 100 Black men plus of Bermuda. Also, in addition, he's a co-founder of a school for boys and works with an organization that serves African refugees. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lew Simmons, who I'd asked to turn on his camera and his video.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ron and Dr. Richard Meyers. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to fellow panelists in this very important subject matter as we discuss, yes, Black men and boys' mental health. And many of the things that Dr. Meyers just spoke about in terms of new emotional technologies and tools to help choose emotions and manage our wellness. Going on to the next slide, as Dr. Major spoke to, he shared about the emotional literacy reflective interactive tool. And in this tool, there are these 4 stages, really. And in the 4 stages, I mean, it's timely as we talk about this tool because there's a recent study by Amy Halberstadt and Matt Shipman where they are talking about the future teachers are more likely to view Black children as angry, even when they are not. So when you think about this future and this recent study that was done by Amy Haberstadt and Matt Shipman, an emotional literacy reflective interactive tool is timely. And so with these 4 stages that we talk about, it's very important to understand the role that these 4 stages play in terms of the emotional literacy and reflective development of our teachers. So next slide, please. In the when we talk about emotional recognition, as Dr. Majors was talking about, we want our teachers to begin to choose their emotions. And if you've ever been a teacher in a classroom in any school system, doesn't matter if it's urban, suburban, country, island, wherever, you're going to have to check your emotions at times. And so for many of our teachers, we are looking at them to identify what are those specific emotions and associations that they have with certain problems that they experience or are experiencing. And as Dr. Major was saying, you know, teachers come to school with their own emotions, with their own personal issues. And so when we think of this here, they must engage in identifying, well, what are those emotions that we're going through? What is this difficult incident that I'm having with Lou today that triggers me? What is it that I left home with? What is it that I'm experiencing in my community that I'm bringing to the classroom? Or what is it that these children or these students, these Black boys especially, trigger in me that has me checking into my own cultural competence? And, you know, Dr. Major spoke about the emphasis on the one of forgiveness, and we've been talking about this one, which is very important. So the first thing in this first stage of emotional recognition is identifying what your emotions are. I mean, the teachers are a part of this training. These are the things that we engage our teachers with in terms of understanding, using the mood meter. And I'll share some things about the mood meter done by Brackett and Stern as we progress. Next slide, please. When we talk about when you recognize your emotions, we then move the teachers to understanding what's going on. What do you think? You know, we say what you think about expands. If you come to a classroom as a teacher with already a predisposition, as the study by Haberstadt and Shipman speak to, if future teachers are already likely to view Black children as angry, even when they are not, that thought expands. And so we want to assist teachers in understanding what is behind that emotion. And the study itself, which is a very important study in the context of what we're talking about, will get teachers to explore their emotions and create an awareness of the factors that have influenced some of that cognitive processing of the emotions. And in that study, they talked about the racialized anger bias. And so a lot of those things are helps the teachers to at least acquire some understanding of what it is that they are bringing to the classroom. But it moves them to a position of analysis. And in this third stage of the emotional literacy reflective interactive tool, we talk about an emotional analysis. And this is a stage about identifying and understanding the deep embedded aspect. Next slide, please. Emotional analysis. And in this analysis, you know, before we talk about a teacher checking a student, again, like I said earlier, what is the deep rootedness behind the messages that you are receiving about the children whom you are dealing with, and especially our Black boys? And there are a lot of preconceived notions that teachers bring to the classroom as they engage our boys. And I know Dr. Majors alluded to what the studies speak to in terms of teachers' emotions toward our boys and Black boys especially. You know, the first suspended, expelled from school, punished in school. So these are the things we want to begin to get teachers to get through that emotional analysis and critically analyze let's look at the timeline of your emotional experiences that you have with the unruly child in your classroom. What provokes that conflict? What emotions do you show? What is it that Lou is bringing to the classroom as that boy in the classroom that, again, signals to you that he's the one you're going to target today and engage in some of that confrontation? And of course, just as we want our children to begin to regulate and self-regulate emotions, when we get into this whole social emotional theory and learning, we want our teachers to move to the fourth stage of their own emotional regulation. And so when you talk about emotional regulation, this is a stage where the teacher, is engaged in, again, next slide of emotional regulation we're talking about here. What is the teacher you want to become? Do you want to be the teacher that always screams at, shouts at, belittles your students? Do you want to be the teacher that exercises, is not aware of, what is my personal circumstances need not become a personal issue directed toward children in the classroom or our boys, especially? So being the person and looking to become the person you want to be as a teacher in the classroom by checking your emotions is very important. So we want to adopt and adapt new ways of relating and responding in the classroom with our boys, with our girls, especially as we engage them. We want to learn emotional regulation in oneself and others. This isn't something, self-regulation isn't just for what we want our children to do, but we want it to begin with our teachers. And we know there are a lot of stresses and distresses that teachers bring to the classroom. So getting them first and foremost to understand what these stages and the role that these stages play in their emotional engagement with boys especially is very important. And these aren't stages that they need to be, or emotions that they need to be exaggerating. Next slide. At the Applied Center for Emotional Literacy and Leadership and Research, you heard Dr. Meyers speak to, we're in the process of constructing an app. And consider this here. Imagine if we have our teachers who have, and there are numerous tools, and I'm going to share about 1 or 2, 3 with you here, but we're looking at constructing an app. I call it right now the TELR app. It can change, right? It's the Teacher Emotional Literacy Leadership Reflective app. And like I said, this is just a demo concept that we're working on right now, but it has multiple purposes. So it'll serve and assist teachers in choosing their emotions. And let me just say it here. We began with a tribute to, honoring Joseph White. And one of the appreciative things and reflective for myself in terms of having met Joseph White and brief conversation with him and then being redirected to a lot of his lectures via video. Joseph White spoke about, when we are organizing and engaging, that we should have a sense of connectedness. We should engage in some deconstruction about that and issues of confrontation, and then move to a level of creativity. And I thought of that in terms of what Joseph White does, in terms of his strategy and his mentorship. That's how he chooses to engage and teach and work with others when they are engaged in the science of the Black psychology. And I found that very refreshing and something transferable and to consider as we begin this process of in working with teachers and teaching their emotions and choosing their emotions, that we begin to, how can we build on some of the things that Joseph White talked about when he says, our connectedness and being able to deconstruct and the confrontational issues that we may find ourselves in, but understanding, emotionally, what that is about, and moving to a level of creativity. But his mentorship, he always communicated in the context of, that's the freedom train ride. And so somewhat this app will serve almost like a freedom train ride for teachers in terms of getting on board and checking your emotions as it is occurring, and not being a reactive teacher to what's going on, but always understanding the process. What does it look like? Next slide. When we look at this particular app, these are some of the key things. Is the teacher, these are some of the questions that we will ask ourselves in the context of those stages. So is the teacher emotionally literate? How the app works? Can you immediately recognize? These 4 stages will be components, hopefully, of the app as we are constructing it. And let me just say this here, when you're doing apps today, apps a dime a dozen, but again, not all apps work on multiple platforms. And one of the things that we are exploring is assuring that as we develop this app, it has the capacity to be functional on multiple platforms. And what I mean by that, well, if you have an Android, it works on that. If you have an Apple, it works on that. It will have the capacity to be transferable to multiple platforms that you may be working with, because there are many apps that are just not transferable to the platform that you may be functionally working with. So again, these 4 stages are what we are looking to have constructed on and a part of the app in terms of the question. Next slide. With it, it's very important that as they, a feature of it is we want folk to know thyself profile. For teachers, first and foremost, to choose any emotion, they must have a understanding of who they are in the classroom, who they are as persons. And this is the relational and personal aspect that they must bring to it. And Richard talked about also the importance of the cultural competencies. And these are features that we want as a part of the app that we want to integrate into it. So at what point does a teacher seek and understand it's important to check my emotion and my competency and the ability to exercise forgiveness? That's very empowering. And so these are, again, constructs of the app that we are flirting with, playing with, setting up in a framework. It's very much in its first stage negotiations in terms of working with our own technicians. And as Richard said, it's been in the making. But I can tell you, when you're integrating technology into these new emotional technologies, you're talking people's emotional sentiments with something that you're manipulating as an app. Is not that easy a transition. But you have tools like the next slide in terms of some things that we talked about. And so this somewhat gives a framework. And I'm not going to, when we have this app, as you know, with most app, you click it and interactively, you are working with it. And so in working with it, it's communicating back to you, okay, as a teacher, emotional literacy, leadership reflector tool, what is this particular tool telling me right now about how I feel toward this child or this classroom or this student or this circumstance? Next slide, please. And so I spoke earlier, and this is an example, and you will find many evidence of mood meters. And, when we're asking teachers to, of course, choose and check their emotions, the mood meter really is I find it very interactive and supportive tool. And this is something also that we want to integrate into the app that we are looking to design around the whole concept of what we are bringing in terms of those 4 stages. So it has in there, as you notice, the different moods that a child or a teacher brings to the classroom, that we all bring, really. When are you joyful? And so when we talk about the cultural competencies, this is something that we want to integrate in terms of elevating this mood meter to another level. So, you know, what is your cultural competency at the point of engaging, you know, young people in the classroom in terms of their moods? Next slide. Sharing with you, Richard spoke to the tool in terms of trust your heart. And, you know, here in Bermuda, we have been working with some other partners of ours overseas with how we have applied the heart monitors with some of our students. And we had, I think we talked and bring reference to this in the chapter of the handbook of the International Handbook of Black Community Mental Health. In our chapter, in chapter 10, I drew reference to, you know, how we will use and have used the heart rate monitors with many of our students. Our boys especially have been fond of it. We use it in our PE classes. We use it in a survival adventure-based particular program that we have. And it's very engaging and interesting to watch the young people, especially our boys. What is it that provokes this in you? But also for our teachers who are active participants and counselors who are active participants on a adventure-based shift that we have with students. We're once a week, they spend this time on it. But this tool is used with our students in terms of helping them to check their emotions, you know, while they are on the ocean at sea. And if anyone knows, you know, when you are at sea with a team of people, even the person whom you don't like, you all better get along together. If not, someone's going to walk the plank. And maybe the both of you, because you got the wrong emotion checked in at that time. So it becomes a very engaging tool that many of our boys, especially, and our girls, especially, who participate in some of our programs with it, have come to use, and our teachers begin to use it also. You know, there's a reason why your heart rate just went up when you shouted at Lou for something that he had done. And so it registers in the codes, even in correspondence to the mood meter. Next slide. And so these things in closing provoke in us a lot of critical thinking. So I welcome much of your questions about some of the things that you've heard here thus far, and looking forward to the additional presentations by my co-panelists. And please stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons, for that very insightful presentation. Moving right along, again, I want to remind people, if you have questions, to use the chat function. Our next speaker is named Dr. Fabricio Balazar, and correct me if I mispronounce your surname, sir. He is a professor with the Department of Disability and Human Department at the University of Illinois, located in Chicago. His primary interest is in developing methods for enhancing and facilitating consumer empowerment and personal effectiveness among individuals who have disabilities. He's also a fellow at the American Psychological Association and a former president of Division 27 of the APA, which is Society for Community Research and Action. Thank you for your presentation, sir, and you may begin.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. And I want to thank Dr. Meyers for the opportunity to participate here and in the book. Actually, the reason I'm here is because we connected with Dr. Meyers in the late 1980s as postdocs at the University of Kansas. We became friends and we have collaborated occasionally over the many years. So it's been a pleasure. I also, before I start, I wanted to emphasize how important I think what Dr. Simmons and Dr. Meyers are doing with their previous presentation and their book and their instruments. My wife, Dr. Yolanda Suarez, has currently a graduate student who is doing her dissertation with African-American mothers of children. And these are little kids, preschool and kindergarten, who are being expelled. And I couldn't believe this when I read this. They are being expelled from kindergarten because of their behavior. And it turns out that their teachers perceive the kids as bad people. Whereas they say, oh, the white kids are just having a bad day, and let's fix it, you know? But the black boys, oh, bad people. And it's shocking. So I think that the work that you guys are doing is wonderful, very important, and highly needed. Because there is no question that the experience of young people of color, especially African-American young people in the schools, from kindergarten all the way through, is a challenge that needs to be better understood and supported. All right, so that was my introduction. Regarding my presentation, next slide, please. I'm going to be talking very briefly about my chapter, which basically focuses on the topic of vocational rehabilitation services for people with disabilities, especially African Americans in the United States. And then I'm going to shift towards a manual that we developed a few years back in another project that we conducted, particularly with victims of gun violence here in Chicago, that included both Latinos and Black youth, and how we used and developed that roadmap to personal success to help those individuals actually continue to move on with their lives after being shot and becoming disabled. Next slide. So as a summary of my chapter, I want to emphasize that the system of vocational rehabilitation services for people with disabilities in the United States was created as part of the Rehab Act in 1973. And that basically allows for all of the states and territories to provide vocational rehabilitation services to people with disabilities. Every disability is eligible. The program is fundamentally designed to help people with disabilities pursue either employment, training, or independent living. And that includes accommodations, modifications in their homes, in their bathrooms, in their houses. When I first started this work in Kansas many years ago, the department was giving them actually carts, adaptive carts. They no longer do that, but you know, yeah, it was very impressive. But they do provide a lot of emphasis on employment. That's one of the main key outcomes that they expect people to attain. The problem is that people of color, and both Latinos and African Americans, have challenges with regards to their outcomes. The Black consumers do not experience as many challenges getting into the system. Their rate is pretty much similar to the white population with disabilities, but the outcomes are a problem. And this is where we have to look back at the contextual issues that characterize our communities and how those communities still retain a great deal of discrimination, segregation, marginalization, and biases, not only against people with disabilities, but also against Black people with disabilities, which make it even worse. So that points to the fact that we need to look at systemic issues, that we need to continue to pay attention to how those systems either support or not support goal attainment and the attainment of educational, vocational, and rehabilitation goals for people of color. We also notice that it is a challenge to address some of these issues, and we did a very thorough review of the literature. And in part, the challenge is not only the difficulty that the vocational rehabilitation counselors have in working with these individuals and helping them develop their vocational goals and the whole process, but especially identifying the opportunities and resources in the community that are going to be allowing these people to move on. One of the things that we have emphasized over the years with this work is the importance of vocational training. A lot of people, when they get injured, either because of gun violence or car accidents or stuff like that, especially with spinal cord injury, many of them don't have prior employment experience, and that becomes a major barrier. So the whole issue of preparing better and thinking about vocational rehabilitation training and careers that are not necessarily going to four-year colleges, but vocational programs for more hands-on occupations in the community need to be explored more, because often teachers in schools don't look at vocational preparation and vocational skills anymore. They used to many years ago when I started this work. But now they even close a lot of the shops that they used to have in the high schools. They used to have repair shops, woodwork, plumbing, all kinds of stuff with experts and connections with the unions and so forth, to help some of these youth think about those kinds of occupations. Anyway, that's a brief summary of our chapter. I hope that you have a chance to look at it and enjoy it. Next. I want to introduce you a roadmap, which is a training guide that we developed years ago, as I mentioned, to help individuals, in this case with disabilities, but it's applied to anybody, set goals and pursue them. Next. The manual focuses first on the process of moving towards independence. And what does that mean is, for kids that are going to finish their high school, what is going to happen next? Once they finish, are they going to stay living with their families? Are they going to college? Are they going to find a job? What are they going to do? Then we talk about goals and the importance of setting goals and how to set effective goals in order to be successful, understanding your strengths and your challenges. And this is very important because sometimes society emphasizes our limitations and not our strengths, and that needs to be challenged. The importance of networking and connecting with other people, the development of our interpersonal skills, how do we do that? How to receive support and recruit mentors, which is something that I have done a lot of work over the years. Taking action and making sure that the steps that you are taking are conducive to reaching your goals, and attaining educational options and employment options at different levels. Next. I just want to briefly emphasize the importance of goal setting. Is critical towards achieving success in life for all of us. We always have goals, whether or not we are thoughtful or aware of that, but the more we are, the more emphasis we put. One of the things that we found over the years is that often, especially for the kids in high school, they don't have a clear understanding about how to get there. Just to say that I want to become a doctor when I grew up, although it's a nice goal, it's not going to be helpful. because there are too many steps in order to reach that kind of goal. So maybe what the kid needs to do is to finish math or passing math this month, or the test this week, as opposed to thinking something that is so far and removed from anything, because eventually those complicated goals cannot be attained unless you have attained everything else that is necessary to get there. So part of the problem is that a lot of schools don't often encourage goal setting or include goal setting as part of the educational process of their kids. And the importance of this is that every person needs to set goals, have to set goals, and have to set the steps in order to reach those goals effectively. So we have a vision of our lives. What do we want to become? But then we need goals, and we need to break those goals into attainable steps, which are the specific objectives that allow us to reach a particular goal. So the example that I mentioned about passing math at the end of the year is going to require specific objectives for every week. You have to do the homework, you have to study, you have to pass the test, etc. And if you follow those objectives, you are going to reach your goal of passing math. And once you pass math, then you have another goal for the following year and so forth. Next. This is an example of one of the forms that is included in the manual that allow the person to identify the goals, identify several specific strategies, which are the objectives for each of the goals, and then identify the specific outcomes or more importantly, what happened. Because you see, part of the problem that lead us to failure is that when we stop or we are not making the necessary progress, we try to ignore it and we don't look at the big picture. And this document allows the student and the teacher, because this is done in collaboration between the student and the teacher or the caseworker, to follow up the progress of the student in this process. And I believe that is a critical step, because without knowing how that progress is coming along, it becomes very difficult. And then at the end, oops, you didn't reach the goal. So this is a way of keeping track and making sure that progress is being attained. And when not, then you have to change either the goal or modify the steps and the outcomes, the actions, in order to reach the desired outcomes. Next. Finally, we developed this goal attainment score, which help people identify their progress. And it's very descriptive. And we have actually published some work using this kind of instrument that we have used to help identify the kind of progress that people are making. Sometimes people attain their goals as expected, but sometimes even better. And that has to be recognized, because sometimes, it's not only attain something, but even more than that. So it includes everything: the active pursuit, the progress, depending on when the evaluation is conducted, the accomplishment, the expectations, and so forth. Next. So to conclude, and as I said before, and that is explained in detail in the chapter in the book, African Americans experience many challenges when applying and especially trying to attain occupational outcomes compared to whites. And race has to be examined openly. It cannot be ignored. We cannot avoid the importance of looking at the racial composition of the people that we work with, and especially the contextual factors that are impacting their progress or not in pursuing their goals. The roadmap tool has been, tested. It's an effective tool to prepare youth who are graduating from high school or have recently graduated from high school to look at employment, educational, or independent living goals. And as I said, learning to set goals and develop effective plans for action is a central component to the process of attaining what we want to pursue and reaching out the vision that we want to reach for our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balazar. We've come to our final speakers. The first one I'll introduce as Dr. Gail Coleman, and her name is hyphenated, and I beg that she would correctly pronounce her surname. I don't want to do any disservice to trying myself. Doctor has worked in clinical psychology services across child, adolescent, adults, and mental health for about 24 years in a number of settings, including community, forensic, inpatient, and rehabilitation services. So we began research into the Black communities and the overrepresentation of paranoid schizophrenia in the 1990s, which I can identify with because I worked as a clinical social worker before I became a member of the academy, and I know exactly what she's talking about. There is no doubt in the US and likely in the UK as well, a level of racism that impacts this process. The doctor is also passionate about transforming mental health systems that will reflect the impact of all forms of abuse, including trauma and racial issues or racial abuse.
So yeah, I'm Gail. I'm a clinical psychologist here in the UK. And today presenting with me is my sister, Paula King. And basically we've been motivated with a particular project, a vision for a Black-led mental health unit in Manchester. I'll just hand you over to Paula just to introduce herself.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon. Yes, as Gail said, my name is Paula, and I'm the founder and director of Fikaweli, which is to be a mental health inpatient unit for people of Caribbean and African descent. Our name derives from the Swahili, and Fika means to relax and enjoy yourself, and Weli means son of God. So thank you, Richard, for allowing us to share your platform today. We really appreciate that. So my vision was to set up the inpatients unit in Manchester for Caribbean and African individuals so we can achieve good quality healthcare whilst we equip people to achieve a better standard of life. Having worked in the mental health system for a large part of my adult life in various capacities, I became frustrated at the lack of care that Black people were receiving. I offered good quality care to people, so for me, I couldn't really understand why others couldn't do the same. And at a very young age, I decided that I would strive to try and improve the services and the mental health care that Black people were receiving in Manchester. So to this day, I've not given up, and in 2020, when the pandemic arose, we had the opportunity again to jumpstart and fulfill our passion. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a major evidence showing again that systemic racism contributed to the disproportionate COVID-19 deaths among the ethnic minorities. And in addition to the death of George Floyd in such a brutal way, that made our mission even easier to provide a path to recovery and make this a lot more real. So back to Gail.
Could I have the next slide, please? So very briefly, I'm going to go through the Black mental health history in the UK and give some examples of some inpatients in Manchester. I'm doing this, you know, it's well documented, so I'm just going to do a very quick overview. In the UK, there was a study which was conducted over 60 years, just under 60 years, and it found that the rates of diagnosis were elevated for both Caribbean and African groups throughout that period, throughout the 60 years. They remained elevated, and that included those who had migrated to the UK and their descendants. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Thank you. So as an example then, in 2002, this is a black male inpatient. So obviously I've worked with black people a lot of my career, but just in 2002, I took some time to document the experiences of black men as who were inpatients. And as you know, the presentations today are focused a lot on school. So here's a quote, just in terms of the intergenerational impact of racism. And this is the black male patient saying, I had a lot of experiences like that in school of name calling. I told my father, and he said, don't worry about it, son. It's the same thing happened to us when we just come to this country. He used to say we had tails and that we were monkeys and that we stunk because we had tails under our coats. Not only I experienced it, our forefathers experienced it, and even now still experiencing it. So what that is an example for me of is the intergenerational trauma of racism and the impacts. You know, the fact that things haven't changed over 60 years in terms of numbers can partly be understood by the fact that racism still exists, and it probably isn't ever going to go, but we can do some things to reduce the impact, and in this case, to reduce the number of black men in inpatient care. Next slide, please. So two other quotes from black men in inpatient care. One black man said, I've met black men have died in custody and I thought that I could have been one of them. Don't know if I've died and come back. That particular person also talked about being beaten up by staff and being left naked and so forth. And he whispered and said, I don't want to cause any trouble, you know, I don't want to, and yet the fact that he was telling me about his past experiences and then lowering his voice to say, I don't want to cause any trouble is, you know, is terrible. It's terrible. And then in terms of the impact of his history on being labelled with a diagnosis of psychosis, another quote from a black male inpatient was slavery, wondering about slavery. What if they do wipe out the black race? I used to think about this a lot. I think that's part of what made me ill. And it's true when we see racism, when children, like a lot of the presenters have talked about children, when children see examples of racism, when they see that they're being focused on in a negative way in comparison to their peers in school, all those things do have an impact, and they build up from childhood to adulthood. And for some of us, unfortunately, it can it can end up in severe mental health issues. Next slide, please. So again, just bring it up to the present day. In 2016, so in the UK, we had the Mental Health Task Force, and we've had so many policies, so many task force, so many inquiries into racism and mental health. Unfortunately, at times, often after a black man has died in a service. And this particular review, they concluded that men of African Caribbean ethnic origin are twice as likely to be detained in low secure services than men of white British origin, and to stay for twice as long in those services. And there are many figures in terms, you know, over the years there have been many figures about overdiagnosis, overmedication, and so forth. And sometimes it's much more than twice. Often it's 4 times, 5 times, 7 times as much in terms of receiving diagnosis of schizophrenia, being overmedicated, having longer stays, and so on. Next slide, please. So again, in terms of a very brief history, what we already know, what we've known for decades about black men and their experiences of mental health in the UK is that the coercive pathways to mental health are very present. That's in terms of the police being involved when the black man is sectioned into mental health hospital. The overuse of medication, overrepresentation in hospital admissions, long stays, and so forth. And these trends have been happening for more than 60 years. So this is the reason why why I have to support my sister in the vision that she has, because we do need a different solution. Back to Paula.
Thank you, Gail. So many Black people at the moment feel that their needs cannot be met by mainstream mental health services as they do not provide a cultural relevant service. Most often, this section of assessment is not given much attention when somebody is admitted, when completing a care plan due to the minimum resources that's available. More and more now in nursing, staff are being advised to keep their care and interactions with clients to a minimum. So any chance of a Black client getting the opportunity to speak about their cultural belief is also at a minimum. When they do access services, they can experience difficulties accessing appropriate care and treatment that is culturally relevant. This has been documented, as Gail said, for well over 50 years. Yes, so psychiatric service is usually based on the Western understanding as well of mental illness, and often using a medical model to treat the illness alone, and often does not focus on recovery, which is what our hospital will be about. And this can sometimes cause confusion with the culture, spiritual or religious belief of a person, individual. When it comes to long-term recovery in mental health services that offer specific activities that encourage independence, improve well-being strategies, whilst accessing leisure, education, employment or volunteering opportunity, this is not always available for our people. Speaking from my own experience, care staff can find leisure activities and recovery activities more stressful and uncomfortable when escorting someone who is not white. And in turn, this means that the majority of Black clients rarely get a chance of accessing the recovery streams, such as access to employment or education with a mental health illness, which is not impossible with the right support and long-term strategies. Although there are community services that provide the said mention, few are based on the recovery model, as they are an add-on technically in care in the community. In September 2020, 6 ethnic minority services were commissioned in Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership to run as a pilot by local voluntary sector organisations, and that went on for over 4 months. And that was really to cover the demand of the pandemic, which was led by health leaders in the voluntary sector. So the data from the Public Health England showed that Black people were at 10 and 50% higher risk, and this often faced, in addition, existing mental health challenges from isolation, loneliness, trauma, and even forced migration. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so as you can see, we have numerous famed mental health services in the Northwest, and overall, the Public Health England was trying to look at the cultural sensitive support that was there for the BAME community, which was disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The wider sector that was covered were the communities were the South Asian, Middle Eastern communities, Chinese communities, African and Caribbean communities, and the Jewish communities, refugee communities. So basically all types of communities you can think of. And we noticed there wasn't any LGBTQ plus there. The process, individuals can self-refer to the services. The pilot would have been monitored and evaluated over the coming months to judge whether they will be extended further. And funding, the initial funding for all 6 of these services were £120,000 of government funding. And this was actually divided, if you look at it, it equates to £20,000 per organisation. So if you think about that in terms of the 7 billion plus for mental health services in the UK, that's actually not much at all. Back to Gail, please. Next slide.
So yeah, so with community services, as Paula said, there's complete underfunding in the UK. And that cycle of unfortunately Black men and women ending up on psychiatric mental health units, overrepresented and so forth, continues. And for us, there is an intergenerational issue of working with the children in terms of prevention, but also not forgetting our elders, those who both have been in the system for years and those who aren't our first admission. So with Fikaweli, that's what we want to do. We want to focus on Black inpatients, and we want to, in specific terms, we want to work towards shorter hospital stays, appropriate levels of medication in conjunction with psychological therapy. And as you can see in the UK, again, as Paula said, the funding for services is just ridiculous. But we're pushing to have this because things haven't changed for decades, we do need something different. Next slide, please. So in terms of Fikaweli, what we want to do is provide a service that actively takes the impact of racism and culture on Black mental health seriously in terms of time and resource. I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, what tends to happen every so often, there's a political or significant event, somebody dies or something, and then all of a sudden there's a policy for race equality in mental health. And then you get a short-term funding to set up something, and you know, one person might be running around trying to manage this service, and then the funding ends. And that, what Paula talked about then, that was an example. And that, as you see, BAME is a term used in the UK, Black and Asian Minority Ethnic, was used 120,000 in Manchester to cover those services in terms of a response to COVID. So the big issue for Fikaweli will be time and resource, that the services will be Black-led, so the majority of the staff will be Black and or have a really good understanding of what it means to experience racism and the impact of culture and the importance of culture. We're not, you know, what happens in the UK is you can have one person with the agenda for diversity and mental health in a particular organisation carrying the whole system. That person gets burnt out, which is what we don't want to have. We need services that are realistic about investment, realistic about the resources and so forth. And so as staff, we would support staff also, the staff at Fikaweli, because they will be dealing with racism in society themselves. And I can say that, and Paula can say that as well, working with minority communities, being from a minority community yourself, is hard work. Partly because obviously the work that you do, but also because it has a very personal impact on you. So in setting up Fikaweli, we want to make sure that, you know, racism culture is taken seriously, and the staff, there's forums for the staff to talk about what it's like to work with their communities, what racism they might be experiencing themselves, and how we can make, you know, the Black men in the service not stay in the hospital long, be discharged, get back in the community with support, and not be over-medicated. Next slide, please. So in terms of prevention, so again, most of the presenters today have spoken about children. And for myself, I've worked across child and adolescent and adult services. And you can almost predict, when you see the child, you can almost predict where they're going to end up as an adult, which is terrible. So there's lots of work to do around prevention, which, you know, as the apps there that were presented earlier in schools and so forth, those sorts of interventions will be really important. So even though Fikaweli is an inpatient unit, will be an inpatient mental health unit to deal with the overrepresentation, because we can't ignore that, of Black men in psychiatric mental health units. We also aim to have strong links with Black-led and mainstream preventative services in Manchester. Strong links with services that address very real social inequalities, housing, employment, education, inequalities in health services. And strong links with Black-led and mainstream services for young people to promote intergenerational change. Again, if you think again about that, the quote about the father telling his son about his experiences of racism, and the son coming to him, and the father saying, "Don't worry about it. You know, this is what we had," and the son then trying to. So it's intergenerational, the trauma, the racism, and so even though we're aiming for, our vision is for a Black-led mental health unit that's culturally relevant, that takes into account racism, mental health, that looks at social inequalities. And we also want to have a strong focus on and links to services that focus on prevention. Next slide, please.
Right. So how can you get involved and become a friend of Fikaweli? Well, we have quite a few social media platforms where you can find information on what's happening and how we're actually getting on. We have Twitter, which is at FikaWeliU, Instagram, Fikaweli. We have Facebook, which is Fikaweli, Caribbean and African Inpatients Mental Health Unit, where we try to get the platform in our conversations. We've also got a crowdfunding group, which is just giving Afro-Caribbean mental health. Again, we cannot start any of this without funding. And as we said, in the UK, funding is very rare, so we have to try and be a bit creative. And then to become a friend of Fikaweli, if you visit our website, which is www.fikaweli.com, you can donate and you can find out more about the service that we actually offer. So the initial, we're actually quite worldwide, and we welcome, support, and we welcome interactions from around the world. We have got the website for that. But then, to give an example, at the moment, we've received communications from Spain from someone requesting a conversation in regards to a partner with possible psychosis, which is very religious-based with a Jamaican background, and that's coming all the way from Spain. So we will be working with that person anytime now. And back to Gail, please.
Okay, so our last slide, please. So I hope that you've got the idea and the vision for Fikaweli. As Paula said, we are raising funds, but also we're in conversations with the local health services as well to see what we can do. And this is unfortunately a good time, because you know what I'm talking about when I say this isn't a good time to be talking about racism. So just to end, we'll say this is the reality. And this is a quote from my chapter, which is chapter 17. And I conclude by saying, policies that do not take into account the fact that they are being implemented in a racist society and which are not comprehensively resourced with long-term investment as a basic requirement will not suffice, because in essence they represent an attempt to fix. This is not a quick fix solution situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our presenters. As I mentioned earlier, each of the presenters has a chapter in the book, and I would like to pose several questions that were listed by way of the chat. Very interesting. And the first question is directed to Dr. Richard Meyers and Dr. Lew Simmons. And I'm going to quote from Claire Boone. I'm wondering about the application of the tools to mental health settings and using this with nurses rather than teachers. Sounds so important and helpful, unquote. Dr. Meyers or Dr. Simmons, or both? I will sign off.
Okay, I can respond to that. I mean, certainly it is something that is beneficial to in the health profession and nursing community, as it is also of mutual and equal value to teachers, comparable types of experiences, I'm sure. And it is something that we certainly can take into consideration as we are manipulating and redesigning the app itself to be somewhat multi-purpose across probably career helping professions. As I shared earlier, one of the things that we have found out in terms of designing an app is that we have to design it in such a way that it becomes accessible on multi platforms. And certainly we'll share, it's something that we can also consider would be transferable to those in the helping and nursing profession. I hope that answers your question.
Dr. Majors, would you care to respond? Okay, okay, assuming Dr. Majors is declining. Next question is also for Dr. Majors and Dr. Simmons. And I quote again, I think that a teacher may utilize the label of angry when applied to Black men. I believe may stem from a deep-rooted racial perception they have of what is Black if the teacher is white. If the teacher is Black, then the concept of social class and the particular conduct and mannerism associated with a particular social class is due to either racial or social class perception of the teacher. They may have a deliberate and intentional negative disposition toward the students. Would cultural competence be able to change a chosen perception that may be willfully embraced by the teacher? This question is asked by Doc C.O.K. Mack.
Okay. Yes. What I was going to say to both questions. The first question is that yes, it can be applied, I think, to some of the nursing challenges as well. Yes, I think the answer is yes. I think the technology of choosing emotions is here now. So it just depends on the context. I think in terms of Mac's issue, I think the beauty of emotion technology and being able to choose emotions and emotional literacy, the blessings of that is it kind of neutralizes, well, nothing really neutralizes racism, but it goes beyond that because irrespective of the teacher's state, that if she's able to manage those emotions, wherever her thoughts are, that if we're able to help her to be able to understand some of these intricacies around emotions, to help her develop better relationships and to be able to manage and regulate her emotions, we think that that can have a major impact on her relationship with the young Black boy, and hence reducing exclusions and improving relationships. Let me just say is the other part of that question is I don't want our audience to forget before they go away that the chapter that we're speaking from is free for a limited of time, which is our chapter on social development and emotional literacy, both for teachers and young Black boys, is chapter 10 for the emotional literacy reflective tool, is page 226 to 229. For the teacher emotional literacy scale, which is a 72 item, which actually gives the teacher emotional literacy type. So based on that 72 scale, once the teachers take it and the numbers are crunched, it will give teachers a emotional literacy type. And what we've been able to do is correlate emotional literacy types of teachers and their ability to engage, develop relationships, and reduce, for example, exclusions in the classroom. So that's a very powerful tool. That's on page 230 to 234 of the free chapter. On page 225 is the tool on the non-crisis relationship tool, which basically when teachers say they don't have time to develop relationships, basically what this tool does, it basically on page 225, it gives teachers examples that you don't need a half hour, you don't need an hour, you don't need 20 minutes. That basically there's things that you can say that you can do to a child in 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 35 seconds. We call it investment bank time that can make a major difference in terms of their relationship, engaging the child and helping the child to develop relationships with you. That's page 225. And then finally, on page 214 to 215 is my 10 competencies based on 30 years of research, that basically has the 10 competencies that if teachers are able to focus on these 10 competencies, on my research, I'm basically saying they can be emotional literacy and thereby being able to make a major difference and impact the Black child and have a better relationship and improve ultimately his performance in the classroom and reduce behavioral problems and also reduce special education placement. So that's free. Those are all free. Pages 214 and 215. Remember, the tool is called the Emotional Literacy Reflective Tool, which gives the teacher, what it does is really quickly, it pauses the teacher. It slows her down so that she doesn't go into a spontaneous or knee-jerk reaction. We psychologists feel that if we can get teachers to slow them down, to pause, to think about their responses, that we will feel that we will have a more just response, a more just decision towards that child. So that app basically slows them down by asking them a series of different questions. Again, on page 226 and 229, you'll see the level and different kinds of questions the teacher will ask herself before she makes a judgment towards the child.
Thank you, Dr. Majors. I have a follow-up question. You use the pronouns she and her. Does the sex make a difference in these dynamics?
Does it make a difference? It shouldn't make a difference. But because in our school, 9 times out of 10, our boys especially will have a woman, a female, as their teacher. It's no different here in Bermuda. It's no different in the Caribbean. It's no different in the UK. It's no different in the US. 9 times out of 10, that's who they will have. But I think that's an important question because this refers to fundamentally the respect males in the classroom engage some of the same and have some of the same issues too, Black or white males. And I appreciate that particular question because it is a subject that we have addressed here in terms of, fundamentally is how you speak to a child. And while males may some assume or people assume that they come across as authoritative, the fundamental thing is for many of our children, boys and girls, but especially our boys, it's the respect issue. And they will take and have a different response to even how males will communicate with them with the sense of authority if it's not handled in a respectful way.
Okay.
I'll add to that and I'll say definitely yes, because Black boys in their developmental, not only their developmental ages, but particularly around when they start to get to high school level. I would go back further than that. From a developmental and a maturation point of view, I would say between 9 and 10, it becomes crucial that they either have a male role model, particularly if a father's not involved in their life, they need to have a role model in their life that is particularly a male and a person of color. They need to see somebody that looks like them, that talks like them. So for them because oftentimes behaviors is learned vicariously. So they need to be able, oftentimes people learn from imitation and by modeling behaviors to others. So from a development and a maturation point of view, yes, it's very important, not only during that period of time, but during the whole range of their educational experience, that whether they have a black male that's a teacher in the classroom, is that it's really appropriate that they have some kind of strong black male presence in their life, may it be a coach, may it be a mentor, or somebody who looks like them, talks like them, so they can learn what the appropriate kinds of behaviors and deportment is. It's very difficult to learn. Yes, they can learn from a black woman or a white woman, but it's very difficult for them to be able to imitate and to learn certain kinds of behaviors that can only be passed down by a male of color. And where you have internationally and nationally, where oftentimes the classroom is 90% to 95% or even more white females. Yes, you can see why that's a problem developmentally speaking, and why it's important for us, our precious black young males, to have individuals that look like them to imitate the appropriate behavior.
Thank you, Dr. Majors. I want to ask Sarah to keep me appraised of our time situation. Our next question is to Dr. Balthazar, and I quote, I wanted to ask if you may have done any work with Benny Lee, a reformed Vice Lord gang leader in Chicago who has been working to reduce gang violence in the city of Chicago. And that also comes from the same person by way of Doc Mack. Dr. Balthazar.
Thank you. No, we didn't, but I know of their work. I know that they have been working with the city, and this effort has been, hard and difficult, but very successful. One of the things that they have been doing is midnight basketball. And they are trying to get the kids in basketball courts across the neighborhoods to engage kids, kids that are, teenagers primarily, engage and involve away from the gangs. Part of the issue here that is it's a real problem, and you probably are following the numbers. We are through the roof. The numbers are terrible. We are getting mass murders every day, and we are talking more than 4 people killed or shot every single day in groups. It's really, really bad. And anything that can be done should be done. But fundamentally, this is an issue that is rooted in many, many, many years of marginalization and segregation and redlining in these communities, where literally the schools are terrible, there are no resources, no services, no opportunities for employment locally, and so forth. So the gang activity is one of the few things that become available for many of these young men to make a living. So society is asking those issues. What can we do? How can we change and provide real opportunities for people to succeed in that?
Thank you, sir.
Ron, can I add to that? Can I add to
Yes,
what
sir.
Fabian?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I know Fabricio has been involved with these complex issues for a long, long time. One of the things I want to add to what Fabricio is saying is that this is why we're so excited about emotional literacy, not only for teachers but young boys. Just think about this: that if we're able to develop particular and specific strategies, approaches that can help, that can actually pause. So let's say, for example, a person's in a gang, or they're about ready to do a shooting or what have you. They're able to get an app, or they're able to isolate themselves, and they'll be able to have some kind of process that helps them to be able to reassess, to reevaluate, to think about things in a different way. So, and there are particular strategies and approaches that can help this young boy manage, regulate their emotions. Again, from, there's all kinds of things in terms of the tools that I've developed in my book, that they can use. And so, but in addition to the kinds of tools that we develop to help these Black boys manage, help them regulate their behaviors and choose their emotions. Yes, choose their emotions is that we all, as a clinician, I also use those alongside those techniques and those strategies. I use mindfulness. Fabricio, we've been introducing a lot of this, interesting enough, into some of those kind of communities you talk about and making major headways. Mindfulness, we're also using visualization as a therapist, positive affirmations. So I use those as a clinician, as a psychologist, I use those along some of the more other classic kinds of tools that I've written about and talked about in my book.
Thank you, Dr. Majors. The next question.
If I could add to that, Ron, I mean,
Certainly.
I'm doing some work to answer Mac's question. Also, I'm doing some work with Dr. Stanley Howard in Chicago of the Law and Civics Institute, and I do know that he does some of that gang-related work in association with even his book on some of the best practices. He has a best practices manual for educating Black male youth, and I know he uses that as a resource and tool when working with young men in gang-related life in Chicago. So I wanted to share that. Steady Howard.
Is there anyone else who'd like to comment? Okay, moving on to the next question. And I quote, question for Gail and Paula. Do you think the Mental Health Act review will allow patients to be at the center of decisions made about their care? And this was a unquote by Lorraine Shizo.
We hope so, but unfortunately, I'm very cynical, which is my big thing, I suppose, is that we have to acknowledge, if we're talking specifically about Black men and women, we have to acknowledge that unfortunately we do live in a racist society here in the UK. So any reforms that happen, they will be the trend for a while, but then they'll be forgotten or they'll be put into practice, but then the staff will be completely burnt out. So I guess I'd like to be optimistic, but I think with anything, any implementation, any policy, any change, we have to acknowledge that they're happening within a racist society, and that has to be taken into account when they are implemented and when changes occur.
We live in hope.
Thank you very much.
And
Is there anyone else who would? Yes.
I just briefly wanted to add when Richard said about having black men having black boys having Black men, and we fully support that because you do, having someone who looks like you in terms of mental well-being, it can make the world of difference because they might see that they might appreciate that you're going or you've been through a similar process.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our conference. And I hope that you've been inspired, and I hope that this will prove well worth your time. I'm sure you can get in touch with Dr. Majors and his organization in the UK. I would highly recommend, and I guess fresh copies of the book will soon be sold.